Hello, my name is Jerron Watkins. I am with Coach John P. We're going to talk about swimming. Um, John, I have a question. How did you become a swimming coach?
Well, I always knew that I wanted to be in coaching and teaching, and my sports were swimming and water polo, and so I started teaching swim lessons when I was in high school, and then kind of knew that after um, high school I wanted to kind of stay involved with coaching, which I did through college, and then when I finished college and got my teacher cert, I hopped right into coaching swimming and water polo, and have been doing it ever since. So I'm going into my 23rd year, I think, of coaching at the high school level.
So you've been in the water since a young age.
Yes, I mean my parents started me in swim lessons, and I basically never stopped. So when I was a mom and tot, so I was 6 month old and never stopped.
Yeah, I think with water all around us, I think that's a good thing that we all should learn how to swim.
Yeah, I mean I think swimming definitely is a life skill, right? It's not just something that's a sport, but it's
Right.
something that you need to do because as you get older, right, it can also hurt you in social activities and social settings. If you go to the beach or you're hanging out at a pool, right, like it's something that you definitely need to know just in case.
So how did you get started coaching at Niles West?
So I started coaching at Niles West 2010, and I had been at St. Pat's for 7 years before that coaching. Then I left St. Pat's and took a job with CPS, and I knew Niles West was looking for a water polo coach, and I wanted to stay involved with coaching water polo, so that's how I got in at Niles West.
Well, that's great. So with coaching, what was the primary challenges you faced with being the head coach?
I mean, well, being the head coach, right, there's a ton of challenges. I think the biggest thing is recruiting players or athletes because, right, swimming's not really a sport that, I mean, it is a big popular sport, but, right, it's not with age group kids, but it's not like a super popular high school sport. It doesn't get a lot of press, doesn't get a lot of publicity. It's not something that you see on TV. So, right, like, recruiting kids that are dedicated to the sport and stick with the sport and want to work hard at the sport, I think is a challenge. I think right as a coach, dealing with the in the classroom issues and behavior issues and what kids are doing outside of school, right, making sure that they're taking care of those things, I think that creates other issues that you got to worry about. I mean, really the easiest part of being a head coach is right the stuff that happens in the pool, right? Designing the practices, doing those interactions, right? It's all the other stuff that's outside of just coaching, I think that are really challenges for a head coach to deal with.
So how was the challenges met?
I mean, right, I think the first thing you got to do to meet those challenges is make sure that you're running a good program, that you have a good plan, and that your athletes buy into what you're doing, because I think, right, the more you can establish a reputation as a coach who knows what they're doing to get their athletes to overachieve, right? Not just achieve at their level, but do better than expected. I think, right, the more you'll get kids to buy into then your expectations of getting good grades and not getting into trouble and making good choices, when they are outside of school and outside of practice.
Yeah, no, that's a lot. Yeah, trouble. Yeah, I mean that happened. How much time was spent a week being the head coach? Like working on practices and
So I mean, right, you figure usually for swim teams, right, you're looking at an hour and a half-ish or so maybe in the morning, whether that's swimming or lifting, and then you're looking at another 2.5 hours after school. So you're putting, right, 3-ish to 4-ish hours a day into practice, and to get ready for those practices, you're probably putting in another half hour to 45 minutes of prep time for each practice, because like one of the things with swimming is that's a little bit different than like teaching, right, is with swimming you kind of have a vision of where you want to get, but right, like your practices every day are going to change. I mean, kind of like teaching, right, but your practices are going to change every day based on how your kids are performing the day before, right? So like they did this, so now I'm going to change here, right? We're going to add more here based on their swim meets and what they're doing with their times, because right, you do have a progression on where you want to see kids with their times by the end of the year. So if they're swimming slower than expected, you're not going to push them as hard, or if they're swimming faster than expected, you're going to drop the hammer on them. So you're going to spend a half hour to 45 minutes for each practice just writing the practices. And then, right, if you throw a swim meet in, right? Swimming will usually take you 3-ish hours after school one day, and right to prep for the meet to come up with the lineup, right? That's going to take you another hour or so to figure out the lineup to get ready for the swim meets.
That must be a lot of time.
It is a lot of time. It is, but right, I mean, as a coach, right, you're asking your athletes to sacrifice, so right, you should be modeling that sacrifice too for your athletes if you want them to buy in and you want to have a successful program.
So what area consumed the most time?
I mean, I would say the practice planning, right, is because you want to make sure that you challenge your athletes appropriately and that they're engaged, and that you're doing the most that you can to get them ready for that last swim. So one of the big adjustments for kids who even swim like coming into high school, right, like those good swimmers that are coming into high school, is when you're an age group swimmer, to get to the championship meet, you just have to get the time in a 6-month span. So any swim meet I swim from September until February will qualify me for the state championship meet. In high school, it's one swim at sectionals, and if you don't qualify at sectionals, it doesn't matter whether you hit that time 5 times before, you didn't do it at sectionals, you don't get to swim in the championship meet. And so that's a whole different mindset and a whole different mentality. And probably getting your high-level swimmers to adjust to that is the hardest thing.
Yeah, no, that takes a lot of focus and concentration.
And the nerves and the energy around that, right? Like, and as a freshman, you might be somebody who could be fast enough to swim and make those qualifying times, but now you're swimming against, instead of just swimming against your age group, right? You're also swimming against sophomores, juniors, and seniors, right? So you got to run with the big dogs from the get-go, and that can be intimidating for a lot of kids.
Do you think that pressure gets to kids?
Oh, it absolutely does. I mean, as a coach, if you know you have a kid who should qualify for state as an upperclassman, you definitely want to get them down to state at least once as an underclassman, because they will wet themselves that first meet, because it's just the intensity. The meets are packed. I mean, and it's down to one swim, and especially if you're somebody who's like a sprinter or something like that, like one little mistake in a sprint, and you're going to miss that time anyway. So you want to get them, in case they're going to be intimidated by that moment, you want to get them to that moment as soon as possible, so then they can knock it out of the park when they're juniors and seniors.
No, that's good. So you say you coached at 2 schools. What were the positive and negatives with being the head coach at both schools? Maybe they were the same, maybe they're a little different, but what were the positive and negatives with being the head coach?
Well, when I was the head coach, so I've been a head coach at 3 schools. I think one of the things that is important, that is helpful as a head coach, is if the community supports athletics, and not just financially, right? And I don't want to throw like Niles West under the bus, but right, Niles West has fantastic facilities, right? Weight rooms, trainers, all that stuff. But the community as a whole doesn't really buy into athletics. Like, they don't necessarily do what they need to do in the off season.
Right.
It's a real challenge to get kids to do things in the off season. A lot of kids, even on varsity, are just happy to be on the team. And the purpose of varsity sports is to win. And that doesn't mean that you're going to go undefeated, right? It doesn't mean that you're going to win state every year, and if you don't, it's a failure. But, right, your goal is to put your best foot forward every year to try to win as many games or matches as possible. And so, right, like one of the things I noticed, I was at St. Pat's and Glenbrook North, those communities buy in a little bit more to what do I have to do year round to be the best that I can be.
So why do you think it's the community and not the individual?
Because, well, right, it's a little bit of both, but right, so it's the culture you're brought up in, right? And so if you're in a community that doesn't necessarily dedicate themselves full-time to sports, they play sports more to be social and more to be fun, right? When you get to high school, you're going to struggle with the expectations of varsity sports.
So do you set expectation as a coach?
Yes, I absolutely do. And right, with showing up to practices, with missing meets, if you don't, there's consequences, and you miss practices and meets down the road. Because, right, like I said, there's sacrifice involved, right? I'm sacrificing, yes, I get paid to coach, but I don't get paid enough to justify the time that, right, I miss with my kids, or I miss with my wife, or I miss with my family because of swim meets, practices, and things like that. But, right, I do the things I'm supposed to do because that's what good programs do, and that's what you need to do to set yourself up to succeed. So yes, I tell those kids they have those same expectations too, right? And I think that that's something that at Niles West I saw a lot of the students, a lot of the families struggle with, and I think part of that is because it's not a sports community. We have people that play sports for fun, but that's where it kind of ends. I mean, right? If you look at like even just socially around the school, right? Sporting events aren't a big deal, right? Like whether the teams are good or bad, all the other schools I've been at, Friday nights, if there's a basketball game, whether it's boys or girls, those basketball games are sold out. Football games sold out, right? And those aren't part of the school culture at Niles West.
Nah, I understand that. Even though I went there, I don't know. It's changed over time.
Yeah.
But this was a great talk with John about coaching swimming. I thank you.